Hi, this is Eddie Muller. I am the founder and president of the Film Noir Foundation, host of the Noir City Film Festival in San Francisco, and you may have seen me on Turner Classic Movies as the programmer and host of Noir Alley. But today I come to you in an entirely different capacity at the invitation of my friends David and Rena at the Niles Essanay Museum. I come to you as a boxing fan. And this is something that was never anything that I had a choice in, because my father, the original Eddie Muller, was for many, many years the boxing editor of the San Francisco Examiner newspaper, back when that was the flagship of the Hearst Empire. And so I grew up around the sport of boxing, and I got to hear so many tales that my father would tell of the time when San Francisco was the boxing capital of the world. That happened in the late 1800s and the early part of the last century. There was no Madison Square Garden, there was no Atlantic City at that point, there was no Las Vegas, and San Francisco was a big attraction for the sport of boxing because, as I'm sure many of you are aware, it has always attracted ne'er-do-wells and gamblers. And back when San Francisco was really the Barbary Coast, that's why boxing was so popular here. There were no professional sports teams or anything like that on the West Coast at that point. All of that developed back east. Baseball, football, basketball, all of that, the professional circuit for those sports was all based back east and would not move west for a long time. But boxing could actually stake its claim out here. And at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, this really was a hotbed for the sport on a professional level. So much so that when it did attract all this gambling action and the undesirables, if you will, that go with it, it had a tough road to hoe because municipal government was opposed to boxing for a long time, and it was deemed illegal. And two really interesting things grew out of that. Number one, they didn't want to actually have decisions rendered in the boxing matches because they thought that encouraged gambling. So there would be a thing in the record books that would say ND for no decision, essentially rendering all these boxing matches as though they were exhibitions. But to the gamblers, what happened was they used the sports writers themselves to be the arbiters of the matches, and the ND was bestowed by the writers, and the ND would be next to a particular boxer's name as though they had gotten the newspaper decision in the fight. And that's how the wagering continued, even though officially it was a no decision. The other thing that was really amazing that happened was when San Francisco banned boxing outright in the early part of the 1900s. A man named Jim Coffreth, known as Sonny Jim Coffreth, who was a boxing promoter, took his shows down Mission Street in big parades, usually on holidays like President's Day or something, and he built an arena across the city line right on the border of Daly City and Colma, where the cemetery is now. Jim Coffreth built his big arena, and he earned the nickname Sonny Jim because he had such incredible good luck with it always being a sunny day when he staged one of these big promotions. And no joke, at that time, that arena was the focal point of professional boxing worldwide, and an incredible array of fighters came through there, including heavyweight champ Jack Johnson, who legendarily fought middleweight champion Stanley Ketchel, the man with no fear. He outweighed him by 50 pounds, and Ketchel lost the fight, but he actually did knock Jack Johnson down at one point. Anyway, this era was something that I learned so much about through my dad because he was born in 1907, and that was really the time when San Francisco was a hotbed. And then as a young boy, he heard all these incredible stories about what happened at Coffreth's Arena and the various fight clubs around town uh, Mechanics Pavilion, Recreation Ballpark in the Mission District that I believe was at 14th in Valencia, was also the site of many championship bouts. And there were just these incredible characters: Terrible Terry McGovern, Fighting Dick Hyland, Joe Gans, the Old Master. It was incredible. Jimmy Britt was a local guy who was a lightweight champion. It really was an extraordinary time for boxing. And of course, San Francisco's own Gentleman Jim Corbett, who was a bank teller turned professional boxer, the pride of the Olympic Club in San Francisco, is in many histories credited with putting San Francisco on the map because he fought John L. Sullivan for the heavyweight championship of the world in New Orleans and won an event documented in the Hollywood movie Gentleman Jim, where Errol Flynn played Jim Corbett. But this was just an incredibly picaresque and astounding time for boxing. The reason I'm telling you all this is because, as you may know, the famous film that David helped unearth and identify, A Trip Down Market Street, shot by the Miles brothers, has a connection to all of this because the Miles brothers were the first people to very cannily get the exclusive on shooting films of these boxing matches. Needless to say, a boxing crowd at that time, I'm not going to say they were unruly or uncivilized, but it wasn't the kind of thing that decent people spent an afternoon doing, because you don't know who you were going to be consorting with at these events. So the films of the fights became an incredibly popular thing, and then people could go to theaters and see the replays of the fights, early pay-per-view, if you will. So the Miles brothers sort of had cornered the market on this, and A Trip Down Market Street, my understanding, thanks to David's research, is that they shot that film because they had a leftover film from a big fight that had happened earlier that year in 1906. Most of the big fights happened in February and March. Why that is, I honestly don't know, but President's Day was always a big day for boxing matches. And the Miles brothers had this. There was another fella, Dana, who just signed all of his photographs, Dana, and he was like the exclusive still photographer. So you can see in images from that time, most of them have the Dana stamp on them, but the Miles brothers were pretty much the only game in town when it came to photographing all of these legendary boxing matches. So it was pretty interesting part of San Francisco's history, and something that I just know all about because of my dad. And I'm sure he would get a huge kick out of the fact that I've now become this film expert guy, but I finally have an opportunity to talk about the history of San Francisco boxing in relation to film. So I just wanted, I thank David and Raina, who are great colleagues and friends and do a fantastic job. I just want to thank them for this opportunity to provide a little context to how the Miles brothers actually came to make that landmark film, the film they're now most famous for. They did it all shooting old boxing matches that nobody really watches anymore. But when they were just shooting this tail end and took their trip down Market Street, little did they realize that would end up being the thing they're probably most famous for today. So I hope this was of interest, and I thank you again. David and Raina, thank you so much for asking me to do this, because I always do this in honor of my old man. Thanks a million. Hope you enjoyed it.